Welcome to the September 28th, 2022 Finance Subcommittee meeting of the Brookline School Committee. We're going to start with approval of the July 20th, 2022 Joint Finance and Capital Subcommittee meetings. And Helen has an amendment to just include the dollar amount. Do you want to just repeat, or Robin, do you want to repeat what Helen told you as an amendment?
So I don't have them in front of me, but the amendment would be that the cost would be 137 million to bring the building up to code and ADA compliance. And even with that, the building would still have issues.
Right, and then that goes on to the same sentence that's there.
This is in the last paragraph of the minutes to replace where it says Ms. Charlevsky said the cost would be substantial. I think it's fine. I don't know what it means if we have different minutes of the same meeting, but that's okay.
I'll amend ours at the next meeting at the council.
Okay. So I'll second your amendment, and then, or we'll take it as a friendly amendment. And so we'll just do it. I'll move the minutes as amended. Can I get a second?
A second.
Suzanne. Suzanne, how do you vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And Nancy?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Next item on the agenda is. Oh, and I vote. Thank you.
You did that to me.
You got me. I know you got me this time. I usually remember. Next item is acceptance of gifts, and there's a lot of details. There's many gifts, which is lovely, and a lot of details. So I'm going to go through the details of the gifts. If it's okay, what I'm going to do, Michelle, is I'm going to try and Donna, I'm going to try and summarize what the situation is so that everyone's following along with where we're at, and then we'll go from there. And then if I make any mistakes, you can correct me. How's that? So everyone should have from Robin an hour ago or so a gift acceptance memo that includes many gifts which were very generously donated by many members of the community for the base spring fundraiser. And so you'll see them all there. And so there's many gifts here. Now, some of them you'll see actually have an account number that they get credited to, and some don't. And that's because some of them are gifts, and so there's not actually any money being credited to the account. Those ones have a not applicable, an NA in that column. And then other ones have an actual dollar amount when someone purchased something. Now, some of the questions I had, Michelle, were, I've always been told that when something, and this might not be a question for you, and it wasn't quite answered in the email that you wrote back to me, which all of you, I don't know, Robin, did everyone get that email or not? There were so many emails. Okay, you did. So basically my question is, say someone gets like 2 tickets to, they buy 2 tickets to the US Open through the fundraiser. Those tickets have a face value which is deducted from the donation, right? So are they getting a letter from Brookline, or is something like, are we telling them that their fundraiser amount is completely tax deductible? I guess I'm confused what part of that is a gift.
It is because, oh, I'm sorry.
But there's an actual face value of those tickets, which is.
But their donation is it's what their donation is. That's the value.
I'm not talking about the people who gave the tickets. I'm talking about the people who bought the tickets.
The people who purchased the tickets, it was through an online bidding system, and they would have been the highest bidders. They are under the impression that any donation to Brookline Adults and Community Education is considered a tax deductible donation. And there is an IRS code referenced on the town website, which is where we had people pay for these items that they won. And that's how the money ended up funneling back down into Base's account. But as a government entity, I believe is how we're considered nonprofit. We're not a 501c3, but we're attached to the school department. So, you know, people who bid on these items basically are giving money to base. In return, they get these prizes basically that were donated in kind by, say, like the country club, who graciously donated to us 4 tickets. I'm not sure I'm answering your question though. No.
No, it's more of an accounting question. The point
Okay.
is, what is the actual value of their donation? If I gave you $100 and got a car,
Yep.
do I get to write off $100 on my taxes or not?
Just the $100. Yeah, not the car.
No, that's
Yeah.
my point though. I'm not sure they get to write off $100 even. If the point is that if the thing that they get is actually has a value, then that's deducted from the cost of the donation. And that was,
How have you all handled this before with all the other donations?
I'm not
you've been
sure this
getting?
is like, because I'm not sure we've had a fundraiser in this situation that since the last couple times that like, have we had this recently?
Can I
When
make
was
a
the last time we
suggestion?
had something like this? Who just said something about suggestion?
I was just gonna say that maybe you should ask Melissa
Yeah,
this question because
yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a tax question. But I'm not sure that we're gonna get to the
No, I
answer
agree.
unless-
Exactly. I
unless
think that
someone
that's,
knows it. Matt, do you know the answer?
So in other places I've worked, and I believe like when Mary Ellen was here, we did the same thing. We'd send a letter acknowledging the receipt and, you know, that what their value was and that they should take it up with their tax advisor as to whether or not they were going to take a deduction. We don't
Right.
provide tax advice. We're not CPAs.
and that's my
not the
second
issue, though.
question. No, but partly it is whether or not it's deductible. If we say it's deductible and what the value is of the deduction. But if these people, I just want to, there's that question of whether or not these people are taking the deduction. And then my next question is, and this relates to the letter that we issue to the people who gave us gifts. When we issue that letter, like say, I'm just going to pick on the photo because I think it was one of the very first ones, or the wine one was the first one, the wine and olive oils. The letter that comes from us thanks them for a gift that was the wine, olive oils, and pasta as opposed to a specific dollar amount, right? Because it's not up to us to determine the dollar amount, it's between them and their accountant. So I don't know who's issuing these letters. Who issues these thank you letters? Because that was my next question. Like, do those go from, does Robin write those on behalf of the committee once the full school committee, and then the chair signs them? How does this work?
The only thing that I'm familiar with, Mariah.
Wait, let
is-
me, hold on, Robin unmuting. So when the committee accepts gifts, what happens? Do you write thank you notes that the chair signs?
I think in the past, at least, the Office of Administration and Finance was sending out letters that had the tax, had that, as Matt mentioned tax implications.
Was that Kiana or who is that? Or is that you, Donna?
It was the deputy superintendent who would do those,
Who would
send
actually
those
draft
letters?
the letters?
draft
Okay.
the letters. I believe it was anything with the value over $250.
I think it's over 500.
Oh, okay.
But again, the
Yeah.
question is who's determining value? And sometimes there's gifts, and if we're not, it's not up to us to determine value. That's between them and their accountant. Steve, Suzanne or Stephen, go ahead.
We shouldn't acknowledge any value unless it's cash. If it's cash.
Well, or it has like a face value of some kind, right? Right.
Some very obvious face value, but even
Yep.
then, you know, I think there is a little bit of liability if you say this photograph, thank you for the $6,000 photograph. For all we know, it's a $5 photograph. I don't know. I shouldn't think anyone does. So I think we've got to be very cautious. And I've given a lot of things away, and you never get sophisticated receivers don't give you a value on it.
That's what I want to, I guess that's my whole point of bringing this up is I want to make sure that in our documentation that we're like the gift memo has dollars associated with this. And there's two concerns I have with some of this is that we're ascribing value that we're not qualified. Just because someone told us the like face value of something is X doesn't mean that we should be promulgating that, right? It's where we received the thing and not the rest of it. And also because of the, specifically in the questions relating to base, well, I want to say, well, being really grateful for all the generosity. It's just a question of the accounting and making sure we're doing this in the cleanest way possible. Also, because of the issues we had with the base understanding of the actual dollars attributed to the base account versus what was actually in the account. I want to make sure that we're not putting in that we received, for example, $500 from someone when really there was no actual money involved, because pretty quickly we start to see, right, the accounting and the actuals start to diverge.
The only funds that are going to show are the actual winners of the bids, not the in-kind donations that we received from any of those individuals or organizations. I just thought it was policy that school committee had to say thank you formally and acknowledge people publicly for their kind donation. And then, you know, the people who actually paid for or the winning bidders, you know, my understanding is they would be able to get a tax deduction because it was a donation to the program. So when they paid for those items or services that they won through the bid, they went to the website has a link to the town's donation page, and it has a button for base. It has a button for like the high school, for scholarships, for different things. And people use their credit card. And then it goes into the accounting system on the town side and gets transferred over to the line item at base eventually. You know, we see it coming from there, but we didn't actually accept, you know, any money. There was no cash back and forth between our office and these winners. It was just, we notified them that they had the highest bid and that before we could give them their prize, they needed to make sure that they made that bid donation, you know, through the town side account, which again comes back into base eventually. And I don't know all the steps in between. That would be a finance question.
Donna, go ahead, Cliff.
So I guess I'm a little confused. So when I've gone to silent auctions before for charitable institutions, as an example, I don't recall ever being able to take a tax deduction on anything that I purchased. Because otherwise you're talking about two people getting a tax deduction for the same item. I just don't think that that's allowed. I think whoever donates the item is able to take a tax deduction. I don't think whoever purchases it is able to take a tax deduction.
That's why I
So-
want to make, Michelle, before let's
Yeah.
make sure that going forwards that there's whatever the process is, that it's that we follow up to make sure that we're not saying that it's definitely a tax deductible donation if it's not truly a tax deductible donation, again, because there's a sticker value or for the things that actually have a value, there is some sort of lessening of the write-off, is my understanding, working in nonprofits also. So
yeah, the language that I'm referring to is on that website specifically. So when people paid for it, it has like a little,
but it might not be
star
right.
denoted.
Yeah,
It may not be. I'm not
So
a tax attorney.
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
but you're
Because there's a
also,
donation and then there's this, so it's
but if
different,
you-
right?
But if you're going to attribute any value to something that someone's buying, then you have to know what that value is. And you have to get that value from the person who's donating it, which is contrary to the comments that were made a few
Not
minutes ago.
necessarily. The question is whether or not the value of the money that they're providing to the town, it's up to between them and their tax advisor what that value is. We know how much they've given the town, but how much of that is tax deductible is not something that we would provide. The issue is with the town saying, or someone saying that this amount is totally tax deductible. We don't necessarily know that.
When you go and you buy a ticket to a gala for, Dana-Farber, there's a price, and they will tell you that how much of that price that you're giving is tax deductible and how much is the value of what you've just given. So I'm not sure I agree with what you're saying.
I think that that's true in the case of like a gala where the food costs blah, blah, blah. But in the case of something that like a photograph, it may be a more complex calculation. And That's all. I mean, I just think that we need to be careful on what we write on when we're accepting these gifts as to specific values.
Yeah.
Some of it's just about what is our business and what is the person who bought it or the person who gave it away's business. And I want to make sure that we don't go past what is our business. Does that make sense? Okay.
Would it be helpful for me to try to locate one of those letters that Mary Ellen used to write? So you could look at that language. And then I can also print out the language as it's shown on the website for donations, and maybe
Well, I
that
think
might help
let's make
inform.
sure we go forward. Let's make sure we have a plan for going forward.
Okay,
And maybe Donna, I was going to say before I called on Cliff, maybe we could just put a pin in this to come back to who's going to be sending these letters and making sure what they say in them. Okay. Just again,
Absolutely.
keeping our noses clean.
Mhm.
Okay, so with great thanks to all of the people who contributed, both as donors and purchasers for the base auction. Thank you, and those who gave in kind for various aspects of the base program. I want to go down. There's 3 more gifts at the bottom of page 2, I guess it is, or 3. There was a gift from BCF to BEEP for $2,500 for scholarships, which is great. And then there's 2 more gifts. One is an anonymous gift to the schools and DPW for a composting program. And then a second one about a sustainability coordinator. And I had a couple questions about the composting program. Matt, are you still here? There you are. My questions were, did PSB contribute to the design of this program as articulated in the letter that was attached for documentation? And specifically, it described the funding being used for 2 trash cans at each school, or 2 trash and recycling units at each school, and then a field trips to composting. And my question was, is field trips to composting part of our curriculum to a composting facility, or where would that fit? How does that align with our curriculum? And then for the trash cans, like some of our schools have twice as many students as other schools. So is every school going to get the same 2 sets of trash cans? You know what I mean? Does this make sense, these questions?
It does, I understand. So, the first one to it being part of our, or the second question being part of our curriculum, I guess I would defer to the science department, as to whether or not that's valid. But I didn't write the grant, the DPW did. And I'm not sure who else they spoke with, but we compost now. We would like to do more of it. And if the grant allowed for, 2 barrels per school, yes, some schools would need more than that, but that would be a helpful start. We do have the compost barrels, the toters for the pickups at pretty much all the schools. It's just we're not fully ready to be in use at all the schools at this point. And the town's vendor had changed from when we initially started this program, where they provide some composting barrels as part of the service for pickup. So I hope that answers part of it. What was your first
Well, so is
question?
it not Black Earth anymore?
When we started, it wasn't Black Earth. The school was composting before the town, and then the town got Black Earth, and they provide composting barrels. The thing with that is
So these are barrels to complement those. It would be just the trash
Yeah.
and recycle?
Yeah,
'Cause
I
it says
believe
2
so.
by 2. Okay. Linus, Donna, were you able to ask anyone about the field trips? Because that was one of my questions from yesterday. I didn't see it in any of the material that came back.
I did pose it to the Office of Teaching and Learning. I know they responded with the grants, but I would have to go back to the document to see if there's anything about the field trip.
Linus, do you happen to know?
No, I don't know specifically on that one.
Okay. Any other questions from people on that gift? Okay, Helen, go ahead.
this was a solicited gift on our part, it sounds like, from DPW. Is that correct? In coordination with us? Matt, do you know how this came about? Because it's a lot of money over a number of years.
Is it? I thought it's just $35,000 for 1 year.
In the first year, but then if you read further down, it goes future funding of the position, the district.
No, you're looking at the second gift. I'm looking at the first gift. That's the one that's on the town of Brookline from Aaron Galantine.
The first, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. They're similar but different.
They're the same issue, it's just.
Yes.
But yeah, okay, sorry, I take it
That's
back.
okay. But Matt, I think Helen's question still holds. Do we know if this was like,
I
where
mean,
did this come from?
We've certainly been talking with them because it's a partnership, right? The
Okay.
food we handle on inside the building, but then we have to get it to them in a way that makes it functional for them to pick it up. And the sorting of it, in the changing of habits of the people inside the building is kind of the bigger change. And the sorting, barrels and things that we were going with in some of the other schools, they're pretty expensive, but they're also pretty durable. They're made to last and take a lot of wear and tear, both from repeated opening and closing, as well as spills on them. So they weren't too cheap. And the DPW, we had talked about if they could get a grant to buy some more units, that we found that acceptable. I didn't know when or if they were going to get that. Like we do have people apply for grants from time to time, and you don't know if it's always going to come to pass. Kind of like the one we'll talk about next.
And did the school staff, do they like these trash cans? I
Uh,
remember there was some a while ago that they didn't like. One that when I was PTO treasurer, we bought one that the staff thought were like we gave money for one to be bought that they didn't like. So do they like these ones?
I'd actually have to verify and check because we've had some different ones and we've got some different results. And then recently we've moved to silverware and flatware. So what worked well before, when we had compostable flatware, we might want to be changing that again yet as well if the wide open things don't work and we start losing silverware. So we could be modifying the tops or changing it yet again. There's a lot coming at it rather quickly.
Okay. Any more questions on this gift, or we can go on to the next gift, which was the $74,000 gift for
Staff position.
for a sustainability coordinator, 1 year sustainability coordinator position. I have questions on that one, unless anyone else does. My question was that I recall that last year we approved a $350-ish thousand gift for dishwashers, flatware, plates, trays, and it also included, if I recall correctly, a 1 year position that was more or less sounding exactly like this, someone who was essentially there to help transition the schools away from disposables towards reusables. So what is the difference between that and this?
I don't think that position got funded last year.
It was in the gift though. It was in the last gift.
I guess I have to double check with Sasha, who wasn't in today. With this grant, I did speak with her about it, and the reason it's broken out is because we have to demonstrate that we're having success with the position, and that we're making progress, and then they'll fund years 2 and 3, is what Sasha told me. I don't think we got the full grant amount. I think we might have applied, but I don't think we got the full grant amount for all the dishwashers and the flatware and the position. I don't think we got funding for the position. Because if we had it, I'm surprised that I wasn't being nudged to post it and fill the position. But I can I can check with Sasha when she gets back. She had a death in the family, so she's out on bereavement.
I think that it was in, let me see. I'm just looking at it. It was in May of 2021, I think. So, and I'm almost positive it had a staff position associated with it. I was looking back at my notes. So, on the gifts overall, sorry, I'm just pulling up the documents here. Does anyone want to make a specific motion on them? Or do you want me to make the motion? Okay, I'm going to make the motion, which is to approve the gifts and thank the givers with the understanding that we will make sure that we are clarifying our own procedures and what we are telling people in terms of any tax liabilities, and make sure we're cleaning up our own language on that, and that we are going to get clarity before this goes to full school committee. Sorry, Robin, this is like the longest motion ever on the last two in terms of the difference between this gift and the previous gift, or if the previous gift was not fully funded, and then also the questions about field trips for the smaller gift. So we'll have, it's basically approval, but cleaning up on some things and getting clarifications before it goes to full school committee on the last two. Is there a second on that? Thank you, Suzanne. Andy?
This is not planned to come up at school committee tomorrow, right? There wouldn't be time to get all that clarification.
I think it actually is on the docket for tomorrow, so it probably won't be ready for tomorrow. I don't know for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, I am willing to vote yes on it, but I'm concerned about it not being ready in time.
Helen?
Just a question. Have we already hired the person?
No, we haven't posted for the position because the grant wasn't accepted yet.
Okay, just checking. Okay.
Well, either way, we either had money before or we're getting more money now. So it's not that there isn't money. The question is there twice as much money? Andy said yes. Suzanne?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thanks. And thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Matt, for coming to talk about those things. Next thing is the grants. Again, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 different grants listed. 2 are federal, 6 are state, and the other 3 are local private grants. The first one is the Innovation Fund for $348,000. And one of the questions I had asked, and I think Linus has this information, is whether or not BHS leadership endorsed these applications, or how that process worked. Linus, do you have information you could share just about, and then whether or not there was any sort of anticipated follow-on costs if we accept these funds?
I don't have the answer to the follow-on costs, but from what Anthony shared with me is that yes, BHS leadership endorses the programs being funded. And he serves on the program committee, as well as Gabe from OTL. And he attends these meetings regularly. So he says that the funds will be used for is piloting a new senior math elective, data science for social justice, as well as a tutorial pilot. In addition, we support an innovation fellow to focus on how we teach and support students with the sharp warrior related content. And he says we have a final year for our Reinventing the Restaurant program and our hub advisory. And he says he believes also that this climate, science, and social justice class has one more year beyond 22-23. So that's the extent of the information that he's provided.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then there were 2 federal grants for summer learning and for SEL and mental health. And we got some additional information from Leslie on those. Donna, do you mind just like giving a quick summary? Because I don't have it open right now.
The so the summer learning and the SEL were actually of the OSS grants, along with the
Okay.
comprehensive school health and workforce investment grant. The workforce investment grant is year 2, and that was that budget actually presented combined the 2, so it's for the 180,000. Mike D'Onofrio did provide a sheet with some of the priorities, how the funds would align with the priorities of the public schools of Brookline, and I believe that was an attachment. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. There was a
Um,
lot of stuff that went back and forth. Let me see if I can find
yeah.
that. So the comprehensive school health services mandate is basically funds provided by the State Department of Public Health to meet mandates and standards by the state. And then the workforce investment grant was also to expand the roles of school nurse leaders and add additional staff with COVID and mental health needs within the community.
Mhm.
And then the summer learning essentially was, I think, adding in additional guidance counselors into some of the summer programs and social workers, I believe. It has 150 hours, and then the supporting SEL is 127,000. And I'm not sure, this is just a cut and paste of what the program does. It doesn't talk about what Brookline was doing. And then, sorry, there's a lot of details.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of different
I-
information all coming together.
Then there's for the OTL grants, Leslie Brian Miller provided from her group a PDF document about the programs, the priorities, and who the point people are for each grant.
So those were, one was a social studies update, the investigating history was a social studies update, or was that the civics training? One of them was for social studies
Yeah.
curriculum.
Investigating history pilot, civics training and learning, the coordinated family and community engagement, the METCO grant.
And then the safety net was also for summer
Yeah.
students to be able to participate in the extended day during the summer.
Correct. And then the BEF grants.
Right, and then the BEF grants.
Mhm.
Are there any questions? Suzanne, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, just to be clear, we, whatever group it is, applied for these grants, and these are grants that have been awarded to us.
Mhm.
So it's not like someone saying, here's some money and this is what you have to do. We said, this is what we're going to do.
I think that
Give us money.
the question is, like, for some of these are entitlements of some sort or another, and some of them, someone applied, but the question is, who applied and is it in alignment up the chain with what everyone else wants? I don't think there's not by definition always an understanding of, like, has everyone else agreed that this is what this is what PSB should be doing? So just making sure.
That was my next question. How high up is it signed off when a grant is submitted? I mean, if it's an OTL grant, then does Leslie sign off on it? Or is it done by somebody else and she doesn't know about it? I mean, I'm asking the question you're asking, I think.
Yeah.
It's how do we know if it's aligned with what our goals and what we want?
Exactly, which is why I started asking if we could have at least also knowing, like, what is PSB using these funds for, right? Like, it's all well and good to say a program, you know, we get the generic description of the program from the federal government, but how is PSB deploying those funds? And I think so exactly that we have a greater understanding of that as too. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that might come up that we would need to be aware of is where we apply for a grant and we get it, but not the full amount we applied for. And that leaves us on the hook for meeting some of the costs if we're to fulfill the original purpose of the grant. Like I think this was the case with a position, right, that we have this year, where we got it partially funded through the grant when we wanted it fully funded. So now we are in fact on the hook for that position in the future. So it doesn't mean we don't accept it, but we do need to think about it.
Yep, exactly. I think it's really important. In my mind, this committee is the place where sort of the rubber hits the road on poking into some of these questions before it just goes into consent agenda.
Right. So a look at this document doesn't suggest that there's anything like that with these grants, but I think it's a situation we should always watch out for.
Well, I think it is though, because if you look at, sorry, Helen, just hang on 1 minute. If you look at the BEF or the Innovation Fund, the question is, you know, I'm making this up, but is there a 0.2 or a 0.4 there, which is going to become essentially baked in structurally, and then we are then, after the grant is over in a year or 2 years, we're expected to carry that forward, right? Or is there a 0.4 there, which is designing a program, which by the way is going to say we need 10 extra FTEs, and all of a sudden, like, and I'm making this up, right? All these numbers, but you know, I don't understand what the implications are to point on one of these on the Innovation Fund. What does it mean, this like tutorial change? Like, is there a staff implication or other cost implication to that? It's not clear to me for some of these programs that they're like what the money's being used for and what the long-term outcome of it might be. Helen?
So a little clarification on the Innovation Fund. This was one of the issues way back when they had 2 teachers for new classes. And I happened to be the school committee rep to the Innovation Fund at the time and was on the program committee. I don't know if there's still a school committee member on the program committee, but I saw as my responsibility to make sure, you know, hey guys, if you want the school system to take over this program, you know, we can't do it with 2 teachers with 25 kids. It's not going to work. You know, we can't afford it. So, and that became very clear. And I think they have respected that for the most part, that sort of, you know, thought process to, you know, in terms, and we actually accept the courses. And one of the questions in curriculum is always, you know, what is the cost of this program? And is it something that we can cover within the, you know, so some classes, you know, kids vote with their feet and take one class as opposed to another. It doesn't matter to us budgetarily. You know, it might matter in other ways, but not necessarily in terms of a budget. And so I think with the Innovation Fund that, you know, the staff there should be looking at that. And I think they do look at that, but it would be good to reconfirm it.
David, is there still a school committee liaison to the Innovation Fund?
There is, yes. I'll look up who that is. I don't recall off the top of my head, but there is one.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if they're still on the program, you know, committee, because that's where things get sort of, they begin to talk about the programs. And if it's something that we can see right away is going to be a costly endeavor, is something to, you know, not accept as a program right from the beginning, or to really have, you know, intense conversations about why this is critical.
Linus.
Mariah, do you mean the high school innovation fund liaison?
Yes.
I think that's me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, it's Nancy.
Okay. Linus, could you talk to us a little bit about this question of sort of oversight of grant applications and authorization to submit?
So, I mean, the discussion that you're having tonight, I think, is spot on. And I think as we work to start getting our arms more tightly around these types of things, I think it does make sense to have some more stringent, and it's not to say that what hasn't been, but we do need to work towards greater alignment on these, because many times I'll admit that I hear about these, unless it's one of these grants that requires the superintendent's signature, it doesn't come up necessarily on my radar. So we need to build in some internal processes to get tighter on these, to make sure that we are being both fiscally responsible, but then also resource responsible as well. So I think this is an opportunity to refine our process.
Thank you.
If I could say one
Um,
other thing about the
yeah.
CFCE grant, I don't know if people are familiar with that, the Community and Family Engagement grant from the Department of Early Education and Care that we are accepting. That grant, most of the money doesn't even stay we're the sort of the lead agency, so we get 2.4% of the total. But a lot of this, some of it does stay within BP, the public schools, but some of it goes out to other. It's a way of where the early childhood community gets together and can fund certain things, fund supplies for certain early childhood programs, things like that.
Thanks, Suzanne. And then I
Yeah,
think we'll take a vote.
Yeah, I would just say in the Metco, that is a lot of money. So I don't know what our obligations are, both financially, but also, again, as Lina said, resources. I don't know if they're hiring people to do the work, additional, or providing stipends. But that's a good sized grant for sure. And I don't know. I'd love
I
to.
don't think it's so good. We should be getting the same amount as it costs Boston to educate those kids.
So Helen, what is that? It's not the grant. I thought it was the grant.
It is a grant, but the way they do Metco is you don't get a per pupil allocation. I think we do, Linus, correct me if I'm wrong, or Donna, you may know. I think we do when we submit to the state our numbers, so we do get a per pupil, whatever Brookline's per pupil is.
Okay.
But
So this is not the grant that Leslie's referred to, that they've given us a grant to do some work around equity and looking at our curriculum and material.
That must be something different.
No.
That's what I was getting confused about.
This is the base grant. This is the one that funds the directors and so forth. If you look, yeah, you can go through the budget line items. It includes some teachers and some other.
Because Leslie did mention a grant where we're doing some curriculum work.
That was over the summer, I think, above and beyond the base grant.
Okay.
If I recall.
Yeah, I think it is above and beyond. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to move favorable acceptance of the grants. And I'm just going to say thank you, Donna, for humoring me as we got all of this information together, and hopefully in our next bucket of grants, we can have some of this stuff, have people provide a little paragraph in advance of what they're doing so that I'm not torturing you the day of and the day before. So favorable motion on the grants. I'm moving it. Any second? Thank you, Suzanne. Andy?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Thank you. And Robin, will you just make sure that the minutes reflect the conversation about sort of better accountability and, as Linus, I think you used the word stringency around grant submission and applications.
Sure.
Don't forget to vote, Mariah.
And I vote, of course, and make sure the minutes say I voted without Helen reminding me. Okay, next item on the agenda is FY23 budget update. We're actually going to put a little hold on that one for now, just because we were looking at some of the details and we want to make sure that we have everything, given the state reports are due, I think, the end of this week. There was a lot of different moving parts, so we decided to put a hold on that one for now. So we're going to go straight ahead to the FY24 budget development calendar and priorities. Linus, why don't I pull up the calendar, just because I can look at the calendar really quickly and show people the key dates, and then we can go ahead and have a more extended conversation about the priorities. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good.
Okay, let me see if I can get these up. So, and I don't think I shared this with everyone yet. That was my fault. So here's the document, and it looks very similar to the one you had last year. Can you all see this? Okay. Let me make it actually a little bigger too. And so what you see is there's the sort of full planning of the finance subcommittee all the way through, and I'll make sure Robin has this. But then just like last year, we pulled out 4 dates that are the key dates for that. These would be the ones that we would actually vote. So the first one is when is the budget book available? And that one's still not determined, but it's got to be at some point in January. Then January 19th would be the presentation to school committee of the request. February 2nd would be the public hearing. And then February 9th would be our initial vote to send the budget to the town administrator. But the budget itself doesn't have to be final. Linus, do you have any thoughts on when we would have a budget book ready? I should have asked you this
Oh,
before now. I just
$1
realized.
million question, right? We are talking about trying to adhere to the calendar that we built last year, the schedule that we built last year, with getting it out around early January. So we're going to do our level best to ensure that happens. I work toward making that happen. So there are many moving parts, as we can all appreciate, with the internal changes that are going on. So we're ramping up to try to make sure we can make sure that happens.
So we'll leave that as TBD for now, since this is just a first reading, and then we can come back to that. Andy, I see your hands up.
Yeah, are we thinking of doing parallel budgets, or is that not the thinking now?
I think we're going to have to, right? If we're in an override situation, we have to have a budget with override and a budget without override, if that's what you mean, right?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Linus, any disagreement or no?
That's accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions on the calendar? I'll make sure that I send this to Robin. Okay, priorities, budget priorities. Linus, do you want to pull up your document and we can talk through them, and you can talk through them?
Sure thing. Are we seeing the screen there?
Linus, the number of tabs you have open makes me very stressed out.
You can appreciate my headache then. Is that a little bit more visible?
Yes.
All right. So last year, we took the task in looking at budget guidelines and developed 5-year budget guidelines. And so this year, we're going to just use a sliding scale to move those budget lines, advance them 1 year. And I think at appropriate intervals, we can come back and check in on those to make sure that they are still the budget guidelines that we want to continue operating under. So I'll leave the bulk of the text for you there and get down to, with our current district goals, every student achieving through every educator growing professionally, and then looking towards the guidelines that we actually developed and that we are continuing to use as we think about, or suggesting that we continue using as we think about this year's budget. And that is Guideline 1, ensuring equitable access to curriculum and services for all students, with an emphasis on providing equitable access to student populations with identified disproportionality. And we are again faced with addressing that challenge. Guideline 2 is build a budget to meet the needs of the district that would include funding contingencies and unexpected events. Guideline 3 is support the priorities of OTL, including curriculum rollout, program support, and educator development. Number 4, to continue making sure resources are available to support the post-pandemic social, emotional, and academic needs of our students. And the Guideline 5 is to make sure that we're working to improve the life cycle of a PSB employee. So what we did last term was think about specific examples that we are, as we were looking towards building the budget, and you'll see the example and which particular guideline we feel it aligns to. Some of these, the work continues, and I think that's the beauty of adopting the 5-year guidelines is that the work, some of these projects are multi-year and won't be achieved in a single year. So I think that's more reasonable and practicable to the work that we're actually doing. So an example that we had on last year and that continues into this year is support district efforts regarding equitable access to advanced curriculum and inclusion and belonging for historically excluded groups and high achieving students. And at the K-8 level, that's access to grade level general education curriculum, rigorous there. And then at BHS, equitable access to higher level courses. And so there's a whole body of work that OTL is continuing to engage in there. Focus on retention, maintaining and investing in the district's current and future staff. The next example would be supporting the efforts around culturally responsive teaching, supported through professional development and recruitment and retention of educators of color, analyzing enrollment patterns and shifts to determine appropriate class size and staffing. And so that alignment that we will continue to do as our enrollment ebbs and flows, or advances and retreats, if we like that a little better. Continue to assess the FY24 out of district data points, looking at our fiscal projections as well as student transitions from out of district to in district. So there's work that our Office of Student Services is working on there. Examine data points and procedural requirements for enhancing the district's response to needs of students and families. And again, this is in OSS and looking at program design and development, as well as administrative structures. If you recall, what we're now referring to as the yearly report on the special education review. Provide sufficient reserve for our CBA obligations. We recognize that we are in a contract negotiation year for our paraprofessional unit. Align budget to support high quality curriculum initiatives, including but not limited to our K-5 math. We're seeing already some great work and engagement with our students there. So we're going to continue that work, as well as the dyslexia screener, M-Class, that rollout is occurring this year, as well as funding for scheduled curriculum program reviews. So we have an EL review that we're also looking at bringing forward, I think at the October school committee meeting. Support robust and aligned professional development for all PSB employees related to the district priorities. We'll see a little bit of that this November when we're doing an all district PD, and Janae will be sharing more about that in future meetings. Continuing the work around investments in early education through steps to success. So we did a little bit last year with working around grade 3, but now we want to try to look at the K2 sector more extensively upcoming. Reflect the evolving needs of schools through school improvement planning process. And what we mean there is making sure that the work that our school improvement and our school site councils are doing, making sure that those are tracked through the budgeting process so that those school teams can see directly their impact on the district-wide budget. Reviewing the recommendations and commendations from the middle school program review, along with strategic planning there related to next steps from that review. So what are the thoughts that are going to come out of that, and how do we engage in any program redesign that needs to happen at our middle levels within our K-8 buildings? Strengthen our practices and improve efficiencies for building-based child study teams to address learning needs of all students, working collaboratively to address the dilemmas associated with special education referrals, our case management of students with complex needs, and as well as assessing multilingual students and families what their needs are. In our diverse and ever-changing school community, promote professional development for general and special education staff that includes research-based approaches and strategies designed to meet our student needs and addressing skills gaps for those students. And then certainly an emerging need that I've certainly felt our community calling out for is additional after-school options for our students, certainly in the pre-K through 8 sector. And so these are our thoughts about what we would like to focus our budget attention on as we go through this school year. One thing that I did not include, and I've talked with some committee members around, I don't know that it's necessarily a budget priority, but looking at the opportunities that we have to reorganize at least 2 of our divisions right now, and that being the Administration and Finance Office, as well as the Office of Strategy and Performance. So I want to take a closer look at those 2 offices over the course of this year to see what refinements may need to be made in those offices for added efficiencies, structural supports, and making sure. So I'm going to talk more about that in terms of my goals, but that's just a little bit of a preview there. So with that, that's the drive-through synopsis of the budget guidelines for this year.
Can you bring it back to the top of page 2 for to show the 5 guidelines? Thank you. Question or comments from the subcommittee? Questions from the subcommittee? Andy?
Thanks. Yeah, just a question about the item on school improvement plans. Dr. Guillory, are you envisioning any change in how we practice budgeting, or are we talking here about just documenting the existing practice with an eye toward being able to sort of demonstrate the influence of the SIP as it moves through the system?
I think that's the long-term goal, but I'm also, so yes, slightly. That's the long-term goal for it. I also want to be very cognizant of the amount of work and the many things that we're actually tackling this school term. So I won't make that promise to say that it's going to be that extensive. But what I've talked with principals about is I want to make sure that the items that your school improvement plan that you all identify as a school site council, that those items are being reflected in your budget requests, so that as they make their way through right now, we can make sure that we capture those and try to address those in our overall budgeting piece. So it's a little bit of that, but not the final product of where I'd like that to be.
Okay, so for now, it's sort of a making explicit of what people are already supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And what they're putting in there. So for example, I was talking with the principal today, and as an example, there were some professional development requests that she would like to do with her leadership team that came up through the site council. And so we want to make sure that they're not having to trade off, for example, the instructional supply line to cover that. We want to make sure that if that's a value that's embodied by the school site council, that we try to honor that in our process as well.
Isn't that mandated, Linus? Like, doesn't it have to be? Like,
Well,
it's not something
in
we're
terms of-
honoring. We have to do it, right?
Well,
Somebody?
yes. So, but it's making sure that the funds, so it's not playing hocus pocus with the funds.
Got it. It's not saying, yes, you can, but you don't get this. And okay.
Right.
Okay. Helen?
So one thing I didn't see on here, and I know it's been discussed and maybe for the following year, has to do with expanding BEEP to a full day. And I don't know, it certainly fits into the guidelines. But I'm not sure if those examples are all inclusive or they're open for more possibilities.
It's certainly open for more possibilities, and I think we do have some deep discussions coming up in the next couple of weeks. So it's not that this is a closed list, and so we're careful to say that these are some specific examples that we're citing. But what I don't want to do is overpromise what we can commit to this year. Yeah,
I get that. No, and I appreciate the examples because I think it really helps to, put some meat on the bone, so to speak, and understand what these guidelines really are trying to do. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Linus, relating to number 4. Sorry, go back up if you don't mind. at what point do we say, when are we post-pandemic, I guess is my question. When do you think we're post-pandemic?
So that's the question of the ages, right? Because I really should have updated that to say endemic, because that's the new language that's being used now. So I may make that change, endemic. The way that I think about this, I don't have an answer to that, but I think about it in this way, that the children whose education was interrupted as we formally know education, those kids are traveling through our system. And so the question becomes, at what point do all of those cycle out? So I think that our intention is to make gains. I was having a great conversation with the school leader today that talked about focusing on about 20 children that were identified with specific gaps. And as an example, in this round of MCAS, they saw significant improvement with that particular children on that one indicator of MCAS that has multiple indicators, but that one item. But then what are the other parameters, the social emotional aspect, our SEL supports, all of those types of things. So I think that over time, it's going to be sort of a declining scale. But right now, the mental health needs that we see are still at an all-time high. And so I don't want to scale back that too soon. So I think we're going to continue supporting this for a little while into the future.
Well, I guess part of what I'm thinking too is there are some things where we say they're ending and some things might be our new normal. I would like to think that our social workers in the school would be something that we initiated in response to the pandemic, but we see a need for, and it would become our new normal, so to speak.
That's very true. Yeah.
Right. So how do we get away from there's, to your point, there are things that might be quote unquote temporary, but we still see a need for them. But then there's the thing that just like we think we've talked about in capital, increased air circulation being our new normal, something we've realized is really important. How do we prioritize some of these things? And how does that reflected in your language here about things that we don't want to lose?
Feedback.
Right?
Yeah, that's helpful feedback. So I'll take that one back to the team and see how we might repurpose that, the spirit of that, and capture it in a revised guideline.
And then for number 5, one of the things I've been sort of struggling when chewing on this wording of improving the life cycle. And I'm wondering too, if we can't talk about quality of life too, or something like, I mean, to me, the life cycle is about like hiring and those sorts of things, but is the quality of life in there as well? Is that part of it?
That's our interpretation, but we can make the language more explicit if you feel that would be helpful there. Okay. That's how we're thinking about it. Okay. Just their entire time in the system. Okay.
And then I'm going to throw something out there before Suzanne and David, I call on them. Thinking about what should be here in the 24 to 28 budgets are, how do we, thinking about a budget that is sustainable as well, and how we address like the question of override or without override, but all the different issues that we're going to have around our budget. Like the fact that the guidelines it's building a budget in a constrained environment, I guess, is the way I would think about it. And how we're being the most efficient in the use of our funds. Not that we aren't necessarily, but that it should be a guideline that we're always thinking about in my mind. Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you, Mariah. So I want to go back to the life cycle of a PSB employee. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I hope it includes things like mentoring opportunities for people who want it or who are new to a particular position, offering opportunities for people to develop leadership roles, such as, something to do with developing principles among our own group of people, offering lead teacher positions. I mean, just thinking more about or master teacher positions, or just thinking of ways that we can offer opportunities to our employees to grow, not just around, curriculum training, but around leadership opportunities, working together. Again, I'll throw out common planning time. I'm just throwing out a lot, just kind of brainstorming here as we're thinking of a budgets for 24 to 28. I would hope that that would come up in the conversation somewhere and we could start to talk about some of those opportunities.
Thanks, Suzanne. David? Linus, I'm just going to keep calling on people unless you want to respond, but otherwise I'll
Sounds
just call on
good.
people. Okay.
Similar to your point, Mariah, as well as Suzanne's, I think it would be helpful to adjust the wording to number 5. To me, improving the life cycle sounds like it's referring to recruitment, retention, and professional development. To the extent that it's encompassing other areas, it would be helpful to note them. And then with number 2, I would underscore Mariah's point around having some type of language about a budget being sustainable.
Thanks, David. Any other comments on the guidelines before I want to make one comment about the examples, but anyone else, Nancy, or any other members of the committee, anyone from advisory, feel free. And Stephen, we were talking to you earlier, hang on one second, Cliff, but we didn't get the chance to introduce Stephen earlier, or have Stephen introduce himself because it didn't seem like you could hear us. But Stephen, if you can hear us and you want to go off of mute and introduce yourself, you're very welcome to do so when you get the chance. Cliff, go ahead.
Thanks. So I just wanted to touch base on number 2, because given the way it's worded, I know that this would be problematic for some people on advisory. Because several years ago, one of the things that was done was to make sure that the school department worked like other departments in town, so that if there were unexpected costs, things that were unanticipated, that they would need to be dealt with through a reserve fund transfer by coming to the advisory committee, and that any of the reserve funds that one of our prior superintendents had established were essentially eliminated. I think there might have been a special education reserve that would kind of be an exception to that because of the volatility that everyone is aware of in that particular area. But I'm under the impression that there are no other reserve funds at the schools or frankly at any other department in town. So I just wanted to raise that because I know that I won't be the first person to do so, or last person to do so, I should say.
Thanks, Cliff. Linus, one of the things that I think would be helpful to see is in the examples, if rather than having them be very broadly written, if they could be a little bit more tightly focused to talk about the actual budgetary things that would be impacted, like what does it mean, like just to pick on the first one, what is the budgetary implication of equitable access to rigorous grade level general education curriculum? Like what are we actually talking about changing in the budget when we talk about that? Right? So like, because otherwise, I mean, these are all great things, but it's not clear how they relate to budget guidelines and how we see the guidelines 1 through 5 specifically impacting them. Does that make sense? Some of them are a little clearer as to budgetary issues than others,
Yep.
but other ones aren't. And so like, for example, picking on the third one, are we talking about additional, recruiting trips, or what does it mean when we say recruitment and retention of educators of color? It's a great thing. What does it mean in terms of a budget though? That's what is not clear to me. Or culturally responsive teaching through professional development. Does that mean that we're doing additional professional development? Like, all of these things, it would be helpful to just understand the specific budgetary implications as opposed to the general concept.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that item that Dr. Guillory said referred to the Office of Student Services and to the review last year of that one. It would be helpful if the document made that clear, because I was actually confused reading it until you explained it, what that was about.
Where are you on page 3?
That examine data points and procedural requirements for enhancing the district's response to the needs of students and families. Yeah, I somehow didn't understand what that referred to until Dr. Guillory explained.
I didn't understand that either. It's written in a kind of obscure way.
Yeah, I mean, even specifying the Office of Student Services would be helpful there.
Well, or even like, what are all, the idea that you have a series of program reviews coming out, and then that there's going to be budgetary implications of each one of these. So examining that, like articulating the budget consequences of the recommendations that you accept would be helpful. Does this talk about every single program review? Like I know you mentioned middle school here, and that one is the OSS program review. Wasn't there another program? Weren't there other program reviews? Was it world language?
There was an EL program review. That's the one that's going to be shared out at the first meeting in October.
Okay.
And
I
then
thought we had talked about a world language one too. Or am I
I think
misremembering?
that should be on the horizon, I believe. So OTL is going to set their schedule.
We heard in curriculum that if Title I funding comes through, then there could be reviews of world language and literacy curriculum starting as early as January. But that seemed to be contingent on Title I money.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, making them just a little bit more explicit on the finance and the connection would be helpful. Any other comments from the committee or the subcommittee, any other members of the school committee? Go ahead, Suzanne.
I mean, I just want to say these are guidelines, so these aren't like line budget items, is my understanding. And so when we put the budget together, we say these are some of our priorities. Is that reflected in the budget? So I don't know that this time we have to say, well, if we want to analyze patterns to determine appropriate class size and staffing, we don't know exactly what that budget implication will be, but we do know that that's an important part of our guidelines and what we should be thinking about. So I'm not sure we'll have budget implications for all of these activities at this time.
But I don't think we're looking for the budget implications, but connecting, that one is pretty clear as to the fact that it's related to budget, but some of these aren't, right? So it's just making them a little clearer. These are also Linus's examples of the things that will be in the budget. The guidelines are the 5 things up top, right? And then these are the examples of where you'll see them in the budget. So
yeah, I'm just a little confused what you're asking for in terms of budget implications at this point.
I'm just asking for the wording to be a little clearer as to what the budget implication might be. Like some of them aren't really connected to the budget. Like, especially if you scroll down a little bit, Linus, at least they're not clear to me what the budget is. Like if you go to page 3, where is it? Like strengthen practices and improve efficiencies. Maybe that's clear, I'm not sure. Like working collaboratively to address the dilemmas associated with special education referrals, case management of students with complex needs, assessing multilingual. I don't know what that means in terms of a budget. So like, what are we looking for? How is that an example of the things we're seeing above? It's just not clear to me. I'm sure it's really important. I just don't understand how that has to do with the budget. So other than the word efficiencies.
Yeah, the first sentence, I think, explains the second one.
I don't know, and we don't need to solve it here. I'm just saying if the language can get tightened up for our next draft of it, so it's a little clear. That's all.
For tomorrow night? Is that?
No, this is the same draft that gets presented tomorrow night. This will be again what comes to school committee tomorrow night. The next draft comes to finance next month.
So I just want
go ahead.
to reiterate what Suzanne said. That these are things that, it's not clear to me what you're asking for either, Mariah. I think that these are very clear sort of, action items that will eventually, as we get to the budget, be more clearly delineated in terms of cost and needs.
I'm not asking for costs to be articulated here. I'm not,
No.
that's not what I'm asking. Linus, do you understand what I was asking for? Because like at the end of the day, it was,
Maybe I don't, then that's
Yeah.
fine.
So, I mean, I get the gist of what you're saying here, and we'll work to drill it down or point it to it.
Okay.
But I think I do want to just again recognize our current situation, and just say that you know, even things like here, that the curriculum aspect, like the new math curriculum that's in there. So it would be thinking about the next level of professional development or the training that goes with that. So I get what you're saying, and I'm going to try to figure out how to get it a little closer, but I don't want this document to turn into something that it wasn't originally intended for, if that also makes sense. So
maybe the thing to do is to get rid of the examples.
I like the examples.
There you go.
I do too. Because it
But I
shows-
also don't want it to turn into a monster list of like things to
Yeah,
maintain.
no,
So,
yeah. So no, this is helpful conversation. So I think I can find a happy medium.
okay, David.
In addition to embedding budget implications, has there been consideration to identifying all budget drivers? Because that would be important to have budget guidelines that reflect budget drivers. And is there anything that's not currently on the list of examples or in the list of 5 guidelines that would address adequately budget drivers?
That's a great point. And we had a separate budget drivers document last year, but really that should probably be here. It should be embedded in this document.
Yep, we'll take a look at that aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, David. Okay, any other comments on this? Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself? Can you hear us? You can hear us,
Yeah,
right?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, at the beginning, I had a computer issue. Yeah, I'm Stephen Reeders. I'm a member at large of the advisory committee and on various committees, including the advisory subcommittee for schools. I guess one thing that's come up in a new subcommittee, the advisory committee, is to try and understand how to budget the process better, how to do better budget processing, if you like. And it hasn't got an output yet, but it will before the end of the year. One thing that we are trying to understand is what objectives people are driving at in the various budgets. And I guess there may be a statement somewhere in the town of what the school's objectives are. Might be difficult to do that. I'm not a great expert in education, but you know, that would be something I think might be worth stating in just a few lines. It could be great MCAS scores. I'm not saying that is, but you know, that would be a thing. It could be excellent retention of staff. Could be quite a few things, but it would be helpful, I think, to you know, 98% of the high school students go to Harvard would be one. Obviously, these aren't ones I'm saying seriously, but it would be helpful to know what the objectives are, because otherwise, I think it's quite difficult to focus on trade-offs in a budget. So I don't know if there's a statement of objectives that's sort of measurable anywhere, but maybe something might be considered.
Thank you. And welcome. So I think we're going to put this document aside. Linus has gotten some feedback, and we'll come back to it at our next meeting in 3 weeks to discuss the next draft. And then I think we're at the end other than old and new business. Helen, go ahead, and then I think Linus has something he wants to add into.
Okay, just a quick question to the advisory committee folks. Do we know anything about next year's projected revenues?
No.
No, I got to say one thing though, that we have ripping inflation. as
Oh,
you know.
that we know.
And obviously that is going to put a lot of pressure on budgets, because we already discovered last year that in many departments of the town, we were losing people. We're many policemen short. We've got shortages in the IT department. All over the town, we're unable to fill slots. And part of that, at least, is that the people running those departments said that they didn't think we were competitive on salaries. So if we do make if there's a general call for adjustments to salaries to try and keep at least somewhere towards, compensating for inflation, given that our total budget is capped ultimately by the 2.5% rule, it could put a lot of pressure on budgets, I think, this year. But I don't think anyone really is talking about that. Cliff may have a different view, but it does seem to me a factor that's not been relevant in any of the recent 20 years or so. But this year it's going to be highly impactful.
Just to add on to Helen's question, we talked about this a little bit, town school partnership, and there was no revised forecast yet as of last week. So I would assume it's going to show up in mid-November or whenever it usually shows up in the long-term forecast presentation. Linus, did you want to add on something under new business?
Sure thing. So if you will, you may not recall, but when I first arrived to Brookline, I think one of the, during my entry planning process, one of the things that I was kicking around was this idea of a financial audit, given the nature of school expenses and department running and those types of things over the past few years. And given, again, now that we have an opportunity to review the admin and finance structure, I think it may be a good idea, or maybe incumbent upon us to consider engaging with an outside consultant or a vendor to actually do an examination of the school's spending to look for additional efficiencies and those types of things. So I just want to put that in front of this committee for that level of consideration. But someone that has experience reviewing school budgets, looking for operating efficiencies, those types of things, as well as, since we are also potentially gearing up for an operating override, that may prove helpful as well, to make sure that we're, and I think about it in terms of what we're also thinking about with the various program reviews. Are we getting academic returns on those investments? So are we getting what we're paying for in some of our programming, that type of thing? But I think looking at the what's been happening on our finance side, I think it makes sense for us to engage with that. So
Hang on one second, Cliff. Hold on one second. I just want to clarify. You said a financial audit. I just want to say we've been audited and we're past it. We're good on audit bits, but yes, a sort of a consultant to work with on a review, as you said. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that it's not an audit in the sort of traditional, not an audit in that sense of the word, because we have that separately. Hang on one second, Stephen. Cliff got his hand up.
All right. So as everyone on the call knows, tomorrow afternoon from 5 to 7, the school subcommittee is going to be having a public hearing on proposed Article 37, which is a resolution that essentially it may not call for exactly the same thing that Linus just described, but there's going to be pretty substantial overlap, I would expect. And I hope that there's going to be a good attendance from some folks from the school committee there.
Remembering that we have school committee at the exact same time, and you booked your meeting on top of our meeting.
All right, well then I apologize.
But I will be there.
We did what we could. It's been challenging for all of us. But I think that what you may want to consider, or what we may want to consider, is understanding exactly, Linus, the scope of what you might be interested in, and try to see whether or not there's something that can be done to have I guess, an agreement, if you will, prior to town meeting as to what could be done here through an engagement of a third party that would satisfy both parties, because I can expect that this resolution, could easily get a lot of support. I just think one of those things would be better if we could come to some agreement ahead of time.
Stephen?
I was just going to say, I think the concept of an audit, meaning to try and wonder if there are best practices of spending your money that someone who's seen a lot of different school systems might bring in, I think it's a great idea, really, because obviously everyone wants efficiency, so that what dollars you do have can be spent in the most effective way. So I think if there are individuals out there that can do that, not a formal audit as opposed, but if you like, an evaluation of how to spend money and where savings could be had to deploy elsewhere, sounds like something that would get a lot of support from the advisory committee and so on.
Thanks. Andy?
Linus, I think you mentioned that this might inform preparations for an operating override, but that would suggest it has to happen really soon. Like, is there any way for this to happen in advance of like next year's budgeting?
Well, I think just to check in with that is there are a number of folks that do this type of workforce systems here in Massachusetts. So I think it's depending on how soon I pick up the phone and start calling just to check on folks' availability. I think it's that aspect of it. But if we're looking, to a spring vote for that potentially, I think by securing someone, we could potentially get started on it sooner rather than later.
And we have funds to pay for this, like this year, like in the current budget.
I believe, depending on the cost, I believe we could find some, although I'm saying that knowing that there's some other challenges on the budget right now also. So, but I need to at least want to check in with a couple of firms that have experience with doing what superintendents typically do when there's sort of the change in the handoff from one superintendent to another. This type of review is very commonly practiced, but we didn't take the time to do it upon my entry.
Helen.
Yeah, Cliff, this is very interesting. Why is the advisory committee interested in doing this at this time?
So, Helen.
And is there funding there?
It's
Helen,
Lee's resolution.
So Helen, this is a warrant article.
Yeah.
There's a warrant article that's been proposed. It's a resolution. I'm not saying that the advisory committee is, that the advisory committee as a whole has an opinion, but I would tell you that my expectation is forget about the advisory committee. Town meeting itself may have an interest in this, but this is something that it's a warrant article that's been filed. So it's something that the school department.
Is it just for the schools or for the town
Yes.
also?
Yeah, so we can give you a copy. I thought you might have had a copy by now. But yeah, no, it's just for the schools, and it's a fairly aggressive article, as Lee Selwyn is the author, and he will be there tomorrow. But that I don't think that's really the issue at this point. I think the issue is if Lee's idea, however it's characterized, has merit, and Linus is essentially saying a number of the same things, then again, it strikes me that there's a way forward here, potentially where everyone can get kind of what they're looking for. I am kind of curious as to what the cost of something like this is. And Helen, you know how town meeting works. If town meeting passes a resolution, even though I personally don't believe that resolutions should be treated as requirements, but that's the way the town meeting believes, and that's the way the select board acts. So You know, there will be
Except that
budget.
the school
there'll be
budget
I'm
is
gonna,
budget
it's
funds.
6:30, it's 6:30, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
let
there'll be
Suzanne say
budget funds
something
made
and then I'm gonna
available,
close off
yeah,
the
I'm sorry.
conversation. That's okay. Go ahead,
I-
Suzanne, and then we'll wrap it
Yeah,
up.
I'm just curious, has this been done before? Is this a precedent that advisory committee has gone? I don't know, has requested for particular specific department to do this kind of audit?
This
Or
is
whatever.
not a request. This is not a request of the advisory committee.
No, I
This is a
understand that.
resolution from
As
Lee.
I understand, I meant the resolution, the warrant article. Have we had this before? I'm just curious, Cliff. I have not seen this before, but look, it might be worthwhile for you to read the article. No, I get that. I understand that. I understand.
I'm
Okay.
excited about, I just want to close off the conversation because we're at 6:31. And I want to say that I'm excited about Linus's suggestion, because I think that it gets all of us what we want, which is an opportunity to see if, as Stephen said, there are better practices out there that we could implement. I think that we've done a lot of work in the past couple of years around increasing transparency in the budget, and particularly the last year's work on the budget book and bringing back the budget book has been a lot of really great work done. And I think that this is another opportunity for us to be able to continue the work towards transparency. I think that the merits of Lee's proposal aside, the part where it comes as a resolution is less valuable than having it come, I think, out of PSB and the school committee, where there's a more natural connection between the results, the request of the results, and any action. So I'm excited to hear, Linus, in the next couple of weeks, what you are able to glean from some of the local firms or from some of the other folks who do this as a consulting activity. Okay, any last burning questions, comments before we wrap it up at 6:32? Okay, thank you, everybody. This was great conversation, and have a good night. Bye.